Instead of celebrating their son's high school graduation, a Nebraska family is now planning 4 funerals. A father, mother, and their 2 teenage children are dead in what police are calling an apparent murder-suicide. Investigators believe the father, Jeremy Koch, stabbed and killed his wife and 2 children before turning the knife on himself. It happened just 3 days after Koch was reportedly released from a mental health facility. According to family, Koch's struggles with mental illness were no secret. His wife had been openly discussing his mental health battles on social media in the days leading up to the tragedy. I'm Kennedi Walker, and today I'll walk you through the investigation, the warning signs, and how a family asking for help ended in heartbreak. On May 10th, the Koch family was supposed to celebrate a milestone, watching their oldest son, 18-year-old Hudson, graduate from high school. But Hudson never made it to the stage. Instead of putting on his cap and gown, authorities say Hudson was stabbed to death, reportedly by his own father, Jeremy. According to the Nebraska State Patrol, Jeremy is believed to have killed his wife, Bailey, and both of their children, Hudson and 16-year-old Asher, before taking his own life. Investigators say all 4 family members suffered fatal stab wounds. A knife was recovered at the scene. It was Bailey's parents who made the horrific discovery around 9:45 that morning. Bailey's mother posted on Facebook writing, "Our daughter and her family were killed by a diseased mind with a knife." The tragedy unfolded amid what family describes as Jeremy Koch's long battle with depression and harmful thoughts. Just days before her death, Bailey launched a GoFundMe titled Jeremy's Battle, Mental Health Support Needed, detailing her husband's years-long mental health struggles. In the fundraiser, Bailey wrote that Jeremy had been diagnosed with severe depression in 2009 and that his condition deteriorated in 2024. "My husband tries to kill himself a lot," she wrote, revealing that in March she woke up to Jeremy standing over her with a knife. She says she convinced him to seek treatment and undergo electroconvulsive therapy. Bailey had been openly documenting the family's mental health journey on a Facebook page called Anchoring Hope for Mental Health, where she repeatedly pleaded for support and awareness. Just 2 days before the murders, Bailey posted an update on Facebook saying in part, "Today hasn't been the greatest." Then, just 24 hours before the tragedy, Bailey shared that they had signed paperwork for Jeremy to begin new mental health treatment, but he would never make it. The next day, police say Jeremy stabbed his wife and 2 children before taking his own life, ending all 4 of their lives. Bailey was a special education teacher at Holdridge Public Schools. The district released a statement saying the school community is grieving after a tragic event that has deeply affected us all. Our hearts are with everyone impacted. Cozad schools, where the Koch boys attended, echoed that sentiment, writing, "We are deeply affected by this tragedy. Our thoughts are with all those impacted during this incredibly difficult time." Asher, the youngest, was described as a rock star golfer with a bright future. Hudson was set to graduate just hours after his life was cut short. He had plans to move to California to begin a 3-year apprenticeship. Now, instead of graduation caps and life plans, the family's loved ones are preparing for 4 funerals. Bailey's parents wrote on their Facebook page that they plan to continue their daughter's mission of mental health advocacy. "This country is in crisis," they wrote. "There is far, far too little help available to tackle the mental illness crisis." And joining me to talk more about this is forensic psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Bober. Dr. Bober, thank you so much for coming on today. Let's just get right to it. What a terrible and tragic story. Instead of celebrating their son's high school graduation, this Nebraska family is now planning 4 funerals. I want to start right there because this father, Jeremy Koch, was reportedly just released from a mental health facility. His wife had been pleading for help on social media. What are some of the warning signs that someone's mental illness may be escalating to the point of violence?
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack here. Obviously, the fact that he had a history of depression itself is a warning sign. We know that, for example, 30% of the population has what we call treatment-resistant depression, depression that doesn't respond to the standard treatments. But the good news is that over half those people with treatment-resistant depression can eventually get help. So that stands out to me. Another thing that stands out is that he used a knife, right? A knife instead of a gun. And so when we're talking about a knife, we're talking about intimacy and emotional proximity, what it takes to get that up close and personal with someone. It has a very angry feeling to it, right? Like intense emotions, for example, jealousy, betrayal, hopelessness, and a loss of control. Was this someone who felt inadequate as a father and a husband? Were there financial problems? We know that there was a history of this sort of him standing over one of the family members with a knife before. So the knife to me has a particular significance. It almost has a feeling of him punishing them in some way, projected feelings of rage and asserting dominance over them. So that stands out to me as well.
I wonder, I think about that, but I also think about if he had a, supposed history of this mental illness, do you think maybe they just didn't keep a gun in the house because of his history with that? Or are we leaning more in what you're saying about, the knife
Well,
and how
well,
it
well,
is
cer-
personal?
Well, certainly not having a firearm in the house with someone with depression, removing all lethal items. A firearm is obviously a huge risk factor for suicide in a home. But, removing sharp objects too, like knives, is something you would want to consider as well. In his mind, this may have actually been an altruistic act, or maybe even a nihilistic delusion. In other words, death was the only escape. Maybe he felt like he had failed them in some way, and that the only thing he could do was take them with him and leave this world because he felt such feelings of inadequacy.
Wow. And yet it's important that you say that because, we hear a lot about depression being internal, people hurting themselves, not others. But how common is it for severe depression or suicidal ideation to cross over into violence towards their family members?
So obviously, depression, mood disorders are a risk factor for suicide, but it's very uncommon for it to lead to violence like this. This is something that's very rare. But again, we don't really know what's going on. And I say this to people all the time. Every family has secrets. You never know what goes on inside those four walls and what really led up to this. Was there a substance abuse issue? Was he using alcohol or drugs? We know that this can lead to disinhibition, less control, more impulsivity. So there's a number of factors here that could have led up to this.
And we touched on this a moment ago, but Bailey, his wife, wrote that Jeremy had been fighting suicidal thoughts for years. And just a couple months ago, she woke up to him standing over her with a knife. What goes through the mind of someone who might turn violent in a moment like that? Are we thinking this is premeditated or just more impulsive?
Well, when I think about something like that, someone standing over someone with a knife, I also think of psychosis. Was he under the influence of a delusion? Was he detached from reality in some way? Because I think most of us would agree that when someone is standing over us with a knife, that it feels, pretty creepy. So, what is really going on in the mind of someone that does that, and what is motivating them? Are they simply depressed, or are they under the influence of some sort of delusion? So that's what I would think about.
Are there specific risk factors or mental health conditions that make a person more likely to commit the murder suicide? Or, like how you said, do they just have to be in some type of psychosis?
So people who commit violence don't tend to be actually mentally ill, right? Only 4% of firearm violence is directly attributable to mental illness, right? The mentally ill are more likely to be the victims of violence and not the perpetrators. But when you start getting into mental illness, for example, that has paranoia, delusions, things that lead to poor impulse control, for example, people on the bipolar spectrum, those people have an increased risk of violence.
A lot of people might ask, how could this happen if Jeremy had just been released from a facility? Do mental health facilities sometimes discharge patients too soon before they're fully stabilized?
Sure, it's possible, but mental health facilities are trying to get people stable to the point where they can go to outpatient treatment or they can step down to a lower level of care. So a mental health facility is looking at what can we do to treat the acute crisis and then refer this person on for outpatient treatment. So he may have very well presented when he left the mental health facility as more stable and at least stable enough to get treatment at a lower level of care, for example, outpatient treatment.
Would that be considered faking it though? Like in some cases, are some people pretending or faking it to get out of treatment? And if so, just how common is that? And is it actually possible for patients to potentially manipulate the system like that?
Absolutely. I mean, we're not mind readers as mental health professionals, right? We have to go with what the patient is giving us. And we also have to check with collateral sources of information. For example, if I have a patient who says to me, hey, doc, I'm fine, I'm ready to go. But then I speak to the patient's mother, and the patient's mother says, hey, by the way, last night he told me he's still feeling suicidal. That's information that I need to take into account before I discharge the patient. We're always concerned when we discharge patients, for example, them having access to lethal means like firearms, like knives. We want to make sure they have people around. We want to make sure they have an adequate follow up plan. So these are some of the things that we can do to manage and mitigate the risk when we discharge them from a facility.
And like how you said, no one is a mind reader. Everyone is, doing the best that they can. But just in your opinion, does our mental health system have enough safeguards to prevent tragedies like this? Like, what needs to change?
So I think you can never completely prevent it, but you can minimize the risk, you can lower the risk. And again, it goes back to what I said, having an adequate follow-up plan, safety planning. Is there someone that's going to be home with them when they're discharged? Do they have an appointment within the next few days? Do they have an adequate medication supply? Have you removed lethal means from the home? Is there a plan if they were to deteriorate or fall back? All these are things that you can do to, again, mitigate the risk, but not completely eliminate the risk, because we know that people who have a prior suicide attempt, for example, are at higher risk for another attempt. So there are things that we can do to mitigate, but not completely eliminate the risk.
After being released, are there warning signs in those first few days that family members should be watching for? Are those moments especially high risk?
Yeah, I mean, that's the time that you really want to be watching them the closest, right? You want to give them some level of independence, but still have some level of oversight. And the more time they sort of have under their belt in terms of their stability, taking their medication, going to their appointments, seeking out therapy, all these things allow you to sort of slowly lower your guard until you feel more comfortable with them.
And Bailey had just signed papers for her husband, Jeremy, to begin a new course of treatment. And then the next day, this happened. Is it common for someone to commit violence even when they're on the cusp of receiving care?
That is when I find sometimes people actually have an increased risk. So a lot of times people will, commit a violent act or commit suicide, and people will say, but they seem like they were doing fine. They actually seem like they were doing better. And a lot of times I find that's because in the person's mind, they've resigned themselves to the fact that they're going to do this. And there's almost a peace that comes over them when they've made that decision. So they may actually seem like they're doing better right before it happens.
And I guess that brings me back to those warning signs then. If how can people look out for that? Like if they seem too calm?
I don't think there's really any way. I think it's very individually dependent, right? The people that are going to know that something's off are the people that are closest to you, right? He's not really sleeping the way he did, or he's losing weight, or he's letting his hygiene go, or now all of a sudden he doesn't want to go to work, or he's giving away his possessions. The people that are closest to you are the people that are going to notice the change in your behavior. They know your patterns of behavior and when you start to deviate from them. But even then, if someone really wants to hide it, if they want to conceal it, if they want to tell everyone that, oh no, I'm fine, I'm on the mend, I'm doing great, again, we can't read their mind. We don't know always what's going to happen, and it's very difficult to predict people's behavior.
Right. And it's clear, Bailey loved her husband and, according to social media posts, believed in his recovery even after he nearly hurt her back in March and unfortunately eventually did. Why might a spouse stay in a situation that could be dangerous?
Listen, they want to keep the family together. Sometimes they're holding on to the fantasy that things can get better, and sometimes things do get better. I don't blame her for holding on. I don't blame her for trying to make it work, because we want to believe that people can be better. We want to hold on to hope. And sometimes, unfortunately, when we hold on to hope, we miss the warning signs. But then there are times when there just aren't really any warning signs. So it really depends. We can't be there. We can't get into the mind of what she was seeing and how she thought to act based on the things that she was interpreting.
Is that what we call trauma bonding? Can love, loyalty, and hope potentially cloud a caregiver's ability to see that something is no longer safe?
Sure. I mean, we see this all the time, right? I see people in abusive relationships. They stay in abusive relationships. They know it's bad for them. They know it's toxic, but they're holding on to hope. They're holding on to the way maybe things used to be. And they don't want to get out of the situation because maybe they're afraid of change. Maybe they're afraid of what the future will look like and they hold on to the past. But yes, that is something that we can see with trauma bonding.
Well, what do you say to those family members who do feel torn, like they're choosing between protecting themselves and abandoning someone that they love?
I would say that at some point, we have to know when to let go. We have to know that when there's a net liability by holding on, it's time to let go. And I think you have to present someone, you have to challenge them with the evidence, you know, looking at the fact that, this is really not only affecting the person, but their entire family, and that maybe they need to take a step back and allow this person to get help and then come back into the picture when when they've achieved greater recovery.
Is caregiver burnout or compassion fatigue a risk factor in these cases?
Not necessarily, there's so many factors that play into this, but sometimes the perfect storm comes together. We don't know when he actually planned to do this. We don't know if this was something that was brewing in his mind over weeks, or maybe one day he just said, you know what, that's it. I can't take it anymore. I'm a failure. I'm not going to leave my family in this world, and I'm going to take them with me because the world will be better off if we're all gone. That may have been something that he came to that day. It may not have been something that he planned over weeks.
So essentially, when Bailey says that he was standing over her with a knife a couple of months ago, back in March, should that have been the moment that she, severed ties or tried to get help? Like, what are the steps that people can take when they notice or they sense that their loved ones might harm themselves or others?
So listen, that something like that is totally over the top. If someone is standing over you with a knife, that's, five alarm bells going off. That's the time to do something. That's not, your spouse saying to you, hey, I've been feeling a little bit down lately. I mean, that's a huge warning sign. So that immediately would prompt the necessity of either involving law enforcement or some mental health professional at that point, going to the emergency room and saying, hey, my husband was standing over me with a knife. I need your help. We need to do something. That is an immediate, imminent threat.
Right. And there's been so much conversation about just improving access to mental health care. But when it comes to extreme cases like this one, like you just described, is access really the issue or is it accountability and follow through?
I think it's really more about accountability and follow through, right? I think when you have a situation like that, that it's an emergency, right? There's an imminent threat and you have to act. So whether that means saying to the person, "Hey, we really need to go to the emergency room. You need to be assessed," and if they're saying, "No, I'm not going to do it," then you need to contact authorities to come by the house with EMS and say, "Look, my husband was standing over me with a knife. He's not acting right. I need help. You need to do something." And at that point, they may take him involuntarily and put him on a psychiatric hold for further evaluation and assessment.
Does stigma play a role here as well? I mean, Bailey was bravely posting and asking for help, and yet her husband still slipped through the cracks.
Listen, I think stigma always plays a part, right? There are so many people out there that are suffering every day that are hiding in the shadows because they're going to feel humiliated. They're going to feel judged, shamed. This is something that happens every day. And it's really a huge reason why people don't get help because in this country, we still view mental illness very often as a weakness and a character defect. But we have to understand that depression, mental illness, this is all part of the human condition. And getting help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength and self awareness.
Absolutely. And, Bailey, she leaves behind family members. Her parents were the ones that actually found all four of them deceased. What are the psychological effects on surviving relatives after a horrible, horrible situation like this?
Listen, I mean, this is something that they probably will never get over. It's something that it's something that they'll never get over. It's something that they'll probably be dealing with for years, questioning themselves, feelings of guilt. Should have I seen this? What were the signs? How did I miss the signs? This is an unimaginable tragedy that they're going to feel the effects from for years to come.
And what can they do to get help?
So again, I mean, I think a situation like this, very often people will start off with their primary care physician. They'll be referred to a therapist for trauma therapy, for grief counseling. They may even need medication. It really depends. A lot of times it's the feelings of acute stress that set in the beginning, and it's just very difficult to find your bearings. And some people say take it one day at a time. I say sometimes you have to take it 1 hour at a time. It's important to get adequate sleep, nutrition, and be around people that you love, that are close to you, that can look out for you and protect you.
Yeah, that's definitely some great advice there. And finally, for any family watching this right now, maybe they're caring for someone who's struggling or afraid something like this could happen. What would you say to them? What's the most important thing that you think they need to hear?
Get help as soon as you can. Don't wait. Don't wait for a tragedy to happen. If you see the signs are there, do something about it right now. Pick up the phone, make a call. If you're financially unable to do it, there are community resources. You can go to samhsa.gov, samhsa.gov. You can call the 988 suicide hotline, 211. There are so many resources in the community if you can't afford it, but don't wait. Get help now.
Great advice as always. Dr. Bober, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure.
The Nebraska State Patrol is leading the homicide investigation, which remains ongoing. The Dawson County attorney has ordered autopsies for the 4 family members. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.